Vintage watches. You either love them or you hate them. On one side, they can provide a one-of-a-kind uniqueness and a value-packed price, but also can be incredibly intimidating if you have no idea what you're looking for. What is going on, everybody? My name is Teddy Baldassarre, and in this video, we're gonna be talking about the pros and cons of vintage watches and my ultimate opinion on them and why I think they're worth buying. So let's jump into it. All right, I can't lie, vintage watches are certainly not all sunshine and rainbows. I think you could make a case why buying a vintage watch is both a good and bad idea. So let's first start with the bad. If there's one thing that I can say is the most important aspect of buying a vintage watch, it's finding authentic pieces and not getting burned. Getting burned in the world of vintage watches it can happen, very easy. Like I've expressed many times, a little bit of knowledge when buying vintage is dangerous. Franken watches, a term used to describe watches that repurpose aftermarket parts and are played off as original, can be found everywhere. The best way to avoid this is to hit the brakes before buying. Educate yourself, but most importantly, find a trusted dealer. If you do this, you basically remove all risk from your purchase. Also, most reputable shops offer a 1-year warranty on most of their watches as well. If you guys are looking for great places to buy vintage watches, I've done a whole video on this listing a ton of great shops to check out. I will link to that in the description down below. The next con of vintage watches is servicing. Just to give you an idea, most vintage pieces need to be serviced every 2 to 5 years and can cost hundreds of dollars. The more complications and complex the movement is, the more it will cost. Complex vintage pieces from brands and companies like Patek, AP, JLC, and Vacheron Constantin will cost thousands to service. Last up is reselling a vintage watch, and this mostly goes for more obscure pieces. Since people are weary about buying vintage from dealers without a great track record, some vintage pieces can be harder to sell if you change your mind. That said, most iconic pieces will sell as long as you offer enough information in your listing, and you can also sell your watch through vintage sites. Sure, they will eat into your money made, but they will assure you that this will sell and will help with the hassle of getting a vintage piece off the market. So all right, so now we talked about the cons of vintage pieces. Now we have to talk about the pros of them. Well, obviously we have to start with history and uniqueness that comes with every vintage piece. I currently own pieces from the 70s, 60s, and 40s, and it's the coolest feeling to look down and know that this piece has been ticking for decades. Are these watches in mint condition? No, but each scratch, nick, and mark tells a story of the previous owner. And although I don't know this person and don't know anything about them, I can only guess that there were some unforgettable moments lived with this watch on their wrist. One of the biggest reasons why I love watches is that there are so many great ones to choose from, and they serve as an expression of our individuality that we can really wear on our wrists. Each vintage piece has their own uniqueness about them, and not one is the same, similar to us as people. So if I have to sum up my style, it's definitely not flashy. It's more really just simple, minimalist style. Just sticking to the basics, not overdoing it, and looking for timelessness in my clothing. Of course, watches are a great component to really elevate your style. And the beautiful thing about vintage pieces is, well, the majority of them, is that they never seem to go out of style. If they can still be considered cool 30, 40, 50, 60 years later, why couldn't they be cool in another 10 to 20 years as well? So this next pro of vintage watches might be a con for you, but I love vintage sizing. I'm not a big fan of the modern day large monstrosities that are on the wrist of many people. So the 46mm and up club, I'll just refer to it as that. I'm more of a fan of that vintage sizing. In other words, that 34 to 38mm range. That works really well with my small wrist. It might not work the best for you, but I think that is just timeless in its design. If Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest athletes of all time, a heavyweight champion, can wear a Cartier on his wrist, I think you can wear one as well. And then lastly, vintage pieces provide tremendous value. Sure, very obscure watches or unique features of a watch can lead to inflated prices. However, for the most part, I believe vintage gives new buyers the opportunity to get their hands on brands that otherwise they'd have no way to afford. I can speak to myself personally. I own a few Omegas, I own a Rolex and a Tudor, brands that if I was buying retail, I could no way afford all of them. But what vintage allowed me to do was get a sense of what these brands are all about, see which ones I didn't like, and also offers crazy variety in what to choose from. So guys, what do you think of vintage watches? Are you in favor of them? Do you have a few in your collection, or are you somebody that had a horrible experience or just afraid to get into them? I'd love to hear your reasoning down below in the comments as always. So guys, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, be sure to subscribe, also hit that bell icon so you know when I release content. If you do want to keep up with me in more personal level, be sure to follow me on Instagram. And if you do want to help support this content, I do have a Patreon. We're trying to raise $500 for Patreon every month so I can have some college kid editor help me with getting the output of these videos up. For me, the bottleneck is just trying to edit these videos in a timely manner, working 50, 60 hours a week. It's tough. I don't want to have to sacrifice quality, so that's a big dream of mine. If you guys can help me out, I would appreciate it. If not, that's cool too. But guys, until next time, be well, and I will see you all very soon.